It's spooky season here at Decoded. With Halloween just around the corner, I thought I would show you guys how to make some creepy horror art in Blender. I started this project with no real plan in mind other than the general idea there would be a little girl encountering something creepy in her house. To create the girl, I used a free program called Make Human. I've talked about this app before, but it's basically a character mesh generator and it works just by tweaking parameters with sliders. You can add textures to the mesh, you can clothe them, you can add a rig to the mesh, and you can even place them into poses before you import it into Blender. With the character imported into Blender, I copied part of the torso so I can make the clothing. The mesh needed a little bit of a clean up job, but it wasn't too difficult to turn that into a nightgown. To texture the clothes, I made a quick bump map for the threads, and I just used 2 overlapping weave texture nodes to do that. I added the decal of a dog to the front of the clothing. It didn't show up in the final render, but I thought it was cute. I also used a cloth sim just to finish it off. So far, so good. To rig and pose the character, I used a free online tool from Adobe called Mixamo. You just line up some dots with your mesh and it'll automatically generate a rig for you. Then you can pick from loads of animation data and you can add some movement or poses to the character. I decided at this point that the character would be sleeping. Maybe there would be a vampire or a monster or something hovering just above a bed, ready to attack. So I found this animation of someone sleeping in a bed, and I added that to the character. I picked a frame that was pretty close to the ideal pose that I had in mind, and then I just manually cleaned up the position in pose mode. I find that the fastest way to add eyebrows to a character is to add a particle system, and then delete all the particles that have automatically been generated. Then I just go into the particle edit suite and I use the add particle tool to randomly add in some particles along the eyeline. The bed and the pillow were created using a combination of simulations and sculpting. The inflate setting came in really handy when I was making the pillow to make it look nice and fluffy. I decided it would also be cute if the girl had a little teddy bear that she was clutching in the night. So I found this reference image and I just modelled one out really quickly, then I used the sculpting tools to clean it up. The mesh didn't have to look particularly good since it was going to be covered in fur anyway. The character was keyframe animated so that she would drop into position while the cloth sim was running. I did that so the cloth would have some realistic folds in the fabric, and it also avoids any weird clipping issues where the limbs are intersecting with the clothing while she's in position. The duvet cover was also dropped into position using a cloth sim. I used a cube as a collision object so the sheet would fold back onto itself as it was falling. This sometimes takes dozens of attempts to get right, but it actually worked on the first try, which makes a nice change. I didn't bother modelling the window, I just used this default Blender add-on called Archer Mesh that you can enable in the preference menu. I added some curtains to it and I gave those a cloth sim as well. I animated the curtains so that they would move while the cloth sim was running. It just makes the final result look a little bit less uniform. The cloth simulation has a tendency to look a little bit too perfect, especially if the mesh is just static and you're expecting it just to kind of drop into place. So at this point I was several hours into the process and I still hadn't decided what the scary thing about the render would actually be. The basic idea I had was that there would be a monster or something hiding under the bed, but that seemed a little bit too cliched. So I fired up Photoshop and I painted out a few comps. Comps are rough thumbnail sketches used by concept artists to quickly try out ideas. I really like this comp of a girl sleeping with a zombie or something peering through the window, so I decided to go with that. Being able to draw is a really invaluable skill for any 3D artist in my opinion. If you want to level up your drawing or art skills, you should check out the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative people like you. There's tons and tons of Blender related content obviously, not to mention excellent videos focused on illustration, photography, video editing, Photoshop and drawing. It's a great platform to take your creative work to the next level. I highly recommend Jonas Duro's Digital Painting Concept Landscapes class. Jonas is a world-class concept artist and a great teacher. I've followed his work since before I was a concept artist myself, and he definitely helped me to improve my artwork. The students of his class have been submitting some really awesome artwork of their own, showing off the skills that they've learned from his class. They've even been creating some of the comps that I was talking about earlier. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description of this video will get a free trial to Skillshare Premium membership. Thanks to Skillshare for helping making videos like this possible. So now that I've finally had some sort of firm concept in mind, I knew that I needed to create some sort of creature outside the window. I made another character in Make Human, and I used the sculpting tools just to add some tweaks. I really emphasised the cheekbones and the eye orbitals to make it look sort of more like a skull. Then I used the grab brush just to give the character a creepy smile. The texture paint tools we used to add just some decoloration and some dark patches to the skin, and they also give it a sort of white, sickly green hue. The teeth came with the model, so I just painted on some extra grime and made the teeth look really yellow. I used a roughness map that would make the teeth look more shiny than the gums, and it gave the gums a little bit of subsurface scattering, just like the skin. I decided to give the zombie no eyebrows in order to increase the uncanny valley effect. The uncanny valley is what it's called when you get that unsettling feeling when you see something that doesn't quite look human. It's why mannequins and realistic dolls tend to look a little bit creepy, whereas cartoon characters don't look creepy at all. Hollywood loves the no eyebrows trick. They've used it on Lord Voldemort, Grima Wormtongue, the Joker springs to mind. None of those characters have eyebrows, and it makes them just a little bit unsettling. Incidentally, have you ever noticed that Whoopi Goldberg has no eyebrows? Now that I've mentioned it, you won't be able to unsee it. Anyway, the render at this point was coming along nicely. I added some light coming in from an open door to illuminate the girl, but it flooded out the whole room with light. To control that, I used a little cycles hack. I added a point lamp into the corner of the room, and I set the strength to a negative value. Instead of adding light into the scene, the point lamp will instead absorb light from the scene. You can play with the colour of the light to pick a specific hue of light that you want to remove from the render. It is a nice hack, but it is a hack at the end of the day. Use it sparingly because it can ruin your colour scheme. I used some weight painting on the scalp of the zombie to control where the hair particles would emit from. Then it was just a case of tweaking the clump, roughness and kink settings until I got this nice messy looking hairdo. The hair for the little girl was created in basically the same way. I just had to spend a little bit more time styling the hair so she wouldn't also look like she'd just been dragged through a bush backwards. So the final tweak before rendering was just playing with the lighting setup. I added a lamp that would shine below the zombie to illuminate the bottom of her face. Lighting characters from below is a really good way to make them look creepy because it emphasises the shape of the skull. I also made a door so that I could alter the exact position of the light that was coming into the room. I tried to keep composition in mind, so I used the light to kind of direct the viewer's eyes and draw a frame around the little girl. The final render looked like this with no denoising. It's quite a dark scene with a lot of bounce lighting, so I had to use about 800 samples to get a clean render. This is the part where I normally say then I just did some tweaks in Photoshop, but I thought I would actually show you what I did. So I painted a dark vignette that went around the frame of the image to really draw your attention to the subject in the middle. I used the dodge tool just to brighten up the curtains and the monster's face a little bit. Then I used the colour balancing tools to add in some cool blues into the shadows and add some warmer tones into the brighter areas. So the glass material on the window had a roughness map to add in some smudges, but they were completely lost in the final render. I re-added those in just using a grime texture that I got off the internet. With a few more tweaks and some contrast and tone adjustments, the final render was complete and it looked like this. You can download the blend file for this scene from my Patreon account if you're a member. Thanks to Skillshare for making this video possible. Remember to click the Skillshare link in the description. The first 1,000 of you will get a free trial membership to Skillshare Premium. Catch you around, guys.